Welcome to Mini Maths at Virtual School Victoria, where we do a lot of maths thinking in a little bit of time. Today's topic is big ideas in fractions. Here are different ways that we represent fractions. You can have fractions on a number line, you can have fractions of a single object that is cut up equally into bits and pieces, and you can have a fraction of a whole group. The thing with fractions, they can be really big or really small, and they can work with just about any number. Now, which of these shapes represent fractional parts? Let's see. That would be one. The two parts are equal, not equal, not equal, so definitely not a fraction. A fraction because we have two equal parts, not a fraction. So an important big idea in fractions is that the parts we're working with have to be equal. Again, you should be able to see the equal parts, and they would be fractions. When you see a fraction in writing, it looks like this. This is called a vulgar fraction, and we are taking one thing and we are sharing them equally into two parts. The denominator tells us how many parts there are altogether, and the numerator tells us how much we are working with. So it is exactly the same as doing a division problem. We're taking one thing and we're sharing it equally two ways, and that will equal a half. Now, if you want to do that on your calculator, have a look at what other type of fraction you get when you take one thing and divide it two ways. So that is a vulgar fraction. Think about the fractions that are represented by this group. We have a group of shapes. What we have here is 8 shapes altogether, and that makes our denominator. We're focusing on the red stars. That makes our numerator. So the number of red stars, the numerator, is 3, but the denominator altogether are 8. And of course the fraction is 3/8, and when we say it, it's the THS on the end, the eighths. Now, there are other things you can do with that group. Another way of looking at that group is having a look at the blue squares. And again, we have the whole group, 8 things altogether. The blue squares give us 5 things. So that is 5/8. And the interesting thing is if we have 5/8 and 3/8, you have 8/8, which is 1 or the whole group. And the way we do that is if we have 8 things divided by 8, we'll always get 1. So fractions do have a nice way of working within the number system. Fractions on a number line. Now, it doesn't always have to be between 0 and 1. But what we have is we've got this number line broken up into 4 equal parts. You can break that number line into as many equal parts as you like, and you can have even a fraction like twelfths or hundredths even. If this is a quarter, what is this fraction here? Now, there are 2 ways of looking at this fraction here. It can be 2 quarters. So we have 0, 1 quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarters, 1. But if you really look at this fraction too, it can also be a half. And that's another tricky thing about fractions. You can have the same fraction appearing with a different numerator and a different denominator, and they are called equivalent fractions, But if you take your calculator and you take 2 and you divide it by 4, you will get exactly the same answer as if you take 1 and you divide it by 2. And both of those will equal a half, but I want you to try that on your calculator. And of course, lots of different ideas. So how do you know if a number is a fraction? It's not a whole number. It's a part of a number. It's on a number line, appears between the two whole numbers. It looks like this or it looks like that. And again, when you get near a calculator, do this and see how 3/5 is the same as 0.6. What else do we know about fractions? You know that it's equal parts of a whole group and it's an equal section on a number line. What are some of the properties of fractions? They can be like any other number. They can be odd or even. We can add, subtract, divide or multiply by fractions. We can even work with fractions and whole numbers. We use fractions to equally share. And of course, it's also a sharing or a division problem when you have a fraction. The bottom line is the denominator. It tells us how many equal parts there are altogether. And the top number on a vulgar fraction is the numerator. It tells us how many equal parts we're working with. And of course, you know this very well. Let's continue. Fractions in real life, some examples there. Now, let's reflect on what we know about fractions. A fraction is a number that represents parts of anything whole that is shared equally. It is a number between the whole numbers. It's one or more parts of a group of objects that has been shared equally, and it is another way to show a division problem. Different types of fractions include proper fractions or vulgar fractions. That's where the numerator is smaller than the denominator, where the top number is smaller than the bottom number. Improper fractions are very interesting too, because if we apply the principle that it is a division problem, if you take 2 and you divide it by 1, the answer will be 2. And we call them improper fractions because the bigger number is on top, the smaller number is on the bottom. And of course, they're the opposite of proper fractions. What else is there about fractions that we need to know? Fractions with a whole number are called mixed numbers. You can have fractions that represent a whole. Again, 5 divided by 5 will equal 1, or 4 quarters are 1, or 3/3 are 1. And we have equivalent fractions. And you can see all these different ways to show a quarter. And if you're being very vigilant, you will see the multiplication tables are there, the division tables, the multiplication tables. They're all connected in our number system. Decimal fractions are always tenths, hundredths, and all of these other fractions can be converted to decimals. And percentages are another type of fraction. So you can see that the fraction family is rather large, rather interesting, and sometimes tricky. Thank you for listening.